It's late September, and this is a commercial organic farm sitting above a former bagel factory in Brooklyn, New York. Rooftop Farms is the first of its kind, and it's run by Annie Novak, Program Director for Growing Chefs.
As a New Yorker, I eat local food because in a city where child asthma rates are super high because of all the shipping and trucking we do, I'm interested in spending my money at a place where I know just up the river in my watershed, there are farmers growing in a way that protects my air and my water that I'm breathing down here as a consumer. For me, local food, it's not just about eating food that's fresh, which makes it more nutritious. It's not just about eating food that's grown close by because it's healthier for the environment I live in. But it also has to do with the fact that we've had thousands of years of agricultural diversity and history. We've had hundreds of thousands of types of plants and seeds that we can grow and eat. And the more we limit ourselves to these small, narrow choices, I just think it's a shame. Locally grown food also comes from a range of crops that, because they're grown to be eaten close at hand, aren't modified for transport. The tomato you buy in the grocery store that has to make it all the way from Mexico has a tougher skin and for that worse flavor than a locally grown heirloom.
Tomatoes are the perfect food to grow locally.
For decades now, farmers and agribusiness and scientists have been breeding tomatoes that are built to be transported. When I buy a local tomato that's only traveling a short ways, the tomato I'm buying is for the flavor, for the nutrition, for the genetic variety, for the color, for the fun of it, not necessarily for the tough skin it takes to stack tomatoes in a box and sell it at a grocery store.
Broadway Stages owns Rooftop Farms, and in the spring of 2009, they raised the money to hire a specialized roofing company called GoGreener. They put a membrane on the roof of the empty factory and brought in 200,000 pounds of soil. The installation took only one day.
And then over the next 2 days, we shaped the farm into the beds that you see now. We set up our irrigation system, and on that morning of the third day is when we had in our peas and our cabbage transplants. And we've been growing since then, so it's a very fast process.
Annie talked with us about how she farms 30 different crops and how anyone with just a little bit of land can grow vegetables organically.
Plants will grow in any amount of soil you give them. If you have a sidewalk crack, you're going to see a weed. Vegetables love 10 to 12 inches of soil, but I've found through working at this rooftop, which only has 4 to 7 inches, that we're still getting a lot of produce out of it. So I would say give them as much soil as they can have, but more importantly, give them a lot of nutrients. They can't just live in potting soil their whole lives. They need a feed of compost. Absolutely anyone can compost. Composting is a very simple, natural process of balancing browns and greens, things like cardboard egg cartons, corrugated cardboard, newspaper, with green products like banana peels, lettuce scraps. As long as they're in a good balance and you have it in a closed container with little holes for aeration, they'll break down. But a properly tended compost pile, which just comes with practice, is a very easy thing to take care of. And if you're ready to take the next step, vermiculture, which is keeping worms, is the absolute easiest, most odor-free way to keep compost in your home. And that's as easy as layering moist newspaper, putting about 10 worms in it, red wrigglers, which are not earthworms, they need deeper soil. And then you put whatever food scraps you have from the week right on top of that. The worms will eat through it in about the same amount of time it takes you for you to refill it, and there will be no smell whatsoever because the breakdown process is so fast. It's super simple. It's one of the most rewarding things ever, and the poop that worms produce, it's like gardener's gold. It's so nutrient rich. You put that on your plants and they will absolutely grow bigger.
While making compost is easy, knowing when to use it can be a little tricky.
What nitrogen does and what compost does primarily is causes plants to foliate. It causes them to leaf. So if you're growing something like a tomato and you had a bunch of nitrogen-rich compost right before they set fruit, the plants will go crazy and make a lot of new branches. They're not necessarily going to make a lot of tomato fruits. So I put a lot of compost on things like my kale, on my Swiss chard, on my lettuce greens, on my basil, but I go easy on the compost except at the right time of year for a lot of my other fruiting plants.
In addition to compost, mulch is Annie's second best friend.
We use mulch here at the farm because as organic gardeners, we're looking for a natural way to stop weed growth. I don't have anything against weeds personally. I think a lot of weeds are good for my plants and actually taste really good. There are a lot of edible weeds. But a weed is just a plant you don't want. And if we're growing tomatoes in one area, I don't want my tomatoes to be in competition with any other plants. So rather than spraying an herbicide, which would not only kill the weed but everything around it, we use something called a mulch, which not only stops the weeds from being able to take root and get sunlight, but mulch also holds moisture into the soil, which for a plant as sensitive as a tomato is a really good thing for them. What we used here as urban gardeners is human hair. There's an organic beauty salon in South Brooklyn that brought us bags and bags of it. Hair is one of the parts of a human's body that a lot of their protein is stored, and so in fact, as the hair decomposes, it's very nutritious. And it's acted as a wonderful mulch. It stays in place as a mat, and it's been a great weed block, and it makes the tomatoes smell like pretty girls. I love farming in the Northeast because we have some of the best kale in the country. The cold snap in the fall brings all the sugars and holds them in the leaves, and kale around Thanksgiving time is one of the best local foods you can eat here on the East Coast. We're growing 3 different varieties right here. There's green kale, purple kale, and this is my favorite. It's called dinosaur kale, or lanceolado is the proper name. It looks a lot like a dinosaur skin, and they're all really easy to cook with. And we have it intercropped, which is another organic gardening technique. When you don't have a lot of space, or you're interested in having the plants help each other, rather than using a fertilizer or anything else to help your lettuce grow, lettuce loves shade. So we put these kale that grow sort of like umbrellas right next to the lettuce, which uses the shade to, instead of bolting and producing seeds, the lettuce grows nice little crowns. And this is a great use of space if you're doing home gardening. Anytime you can put 2 plants together that have a good symbiotic relationship, it'll help your garden be small but productive.
Bad bugs also love kale. Annie's got a cure for that.
Kale actually has a big problem with aphids, and we've had a pretty significant aphid problem on the farm. But as organic farmers, rather than spraying, we've dealt with that organically. The 2 ways we've done that is, one, we use a peppermint soap. Soap actually breaks down the waxy coating on the aphids' bodies, and it makes them helpless, and then they die. And so we spray with a soap, an organic soap like Dr. Bronner's peppermint soap, diluted with water. And you can also just simply take a hose and squeeze it right at the heart of the plant and knock the aphids around, because once they're bruised, they fall to the ground and they don't recover.
When soap and water aren't organic, farmers use integrative plant management.
It's the idea that you use beneficial insects to help take care of pest problems. So rather than using a pesticide, like spraying my tomatoes to stop them from getting aphids, I use integrative pest management by planting plants that either attract beneficials that will eat the aphids, like chamomile, that attracts ladybugs, or a border crop like nasturtium, which keeps the aphids over by the nasturtium instead of by the tomatoes. So when you plant a hedgerow of nasturtium, most of the aphids that would normally be attacking our tomato plants that way are actually clustered under the leaves of the nasturtium, which makes them much easier to get rid of and keep away from plants that we want to protect. Nasturtiums are an amazing edible flower. They add a lot of spice to your food. I'm a vegetarian, and I try to avoid adding salts and things that aren't as healthy for me, and one of the ways I do that is by adding flavor-rich foods. So nasturtiums are sort of my the pep to my salad. And you can also make pesto with the leaves. Now, this is one of my favorite crops besides the kale. Here we're growing beautiful, beautiful pole beans. On the rooftop we grow both bush beans, which are great because it's really windy and low-lying plants are good. We also grow pole beans because they have a rhizobia, a bacteria on their roots that puts nitrogen back into the soil. It helps the rhizobia live on the roots and help the plant digest nitrogen that comes from the air into the soil. And so as an organic gardener, if you're looking for ways to help fertilize your garden, one of the easiest ways to do that is to grow leguminous crops, peas, beans, soybeans. In our case, we get both a beautiful, delicious plant we can eat and also the benefit of what the plant is doing for the soil. So next year, I will plant, where I've planted my beans, a plant that needs nitrogen, like tomatoes, and then put the beans somewhere where the nitrogen has been depleted, like where I planted my corn. Sultan's crescent has been grown since 1735 as this seed stock. As you can see, they grow in curls, and the seeds are rare enough that we're actually going to try and save seeds off of it because there are so few left. Well, seed saving is one of the oldest agricultural traditions, and the idea of buying seeds is actually the new concept. It's something that's absolutely worth learning. It's one of the most beautiful traditions. Part of what's beautiful about farming is the independence you have. You're outside, you're feeding yourself well, you're living a nutritious and healthy life. And for a gardener, if you can save your own seeds as well, you're adding to that cycle of self-sufficiency. Also, the seeds and plants that you grow in your location are the ones that are genetically adapted to where you grew them. So the more I grow and save my own rooftop seeds, the healthier plants I'm growing to grow on a rooftop.
There's a special way to garden in a limited space.
This whole row is dedicated to the idea that apartment gardeners, or people with not a lot of space, can learn to compact all of their gardening and get a really big harvest out of not a lot of space. And since the majority of the people that come up to Rooftop Farms are New York City apartment dwellers, or have folks back at home who only have a small area of their backyard, this is a really practical learning space for a lot of the people we work with. So the idea is that you can measure square feet within your growing space, and within that square foot there are certain spacing rules where you can compact your plants. So for example, most tomatoes need to be about 18 to 24 inches apart. In the square foot gardening system, you take a square foot and you put one tomato plant in the middle. For something like beans, for example, most beans should be spaced, the plants should be spaced about 8 to 12 inches apart in rows that are about 2 feet apart. For a square foot gardener, we put a lot. You're supposed to put 4 bean plants within 1 square foot. We might have amped it up to 6. So right here in this area, we have Lacinato dinosaur kale, purple bush beans, Hungarian hot wax and cherry bomb peppers. We have an heirloom tomato growing, and we have some Swiss chard, and in the front we have basil. And all of that fits within 3 feet by 4 feet wide. So that's a lot of vegetables, and if you come to the farm and you tell me you only have a little amount of space, this is clear proof that you can harvest a decent amount of food off of that little area that you have. So the square foot gardening gives you sort of the maximum amount of plants you can squeeze into one area before it gets so bad that you're not going to get, because of the competition, you're not going to get the food out of the plant that you'd like.
But what if your little bit of land doesn't get enough sun?
I would never, ever be discouraged if you don't have sun. Fruiting vegetables like tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, what helps them fruit is that day length and that sunlight. That's not to say that there aren't a wide range of edible plants that you can grow even if you're in a shady environment. There are a number of herbs that are shade tolerant. Lettuce mesclun mix, which is a mixture of lots of little lettuces and is usually very expensive if you buy it organically in a grocery store. That's easy to grow in shade. We're here to teach people not just to grow their own plants on a rooftop, but in general, how do you connect with something so vital, food? And Growing Chefs, which is our Field to Fork education program, has been bringing school kids up since we started, really, since the first week. And I had a little boy come up to me one day, and I was telling him about how you can grow everything. Everything comes from a plant. And he said, "All right, Miss Annie, where do you grow the chicken McNuggets?" And I said, I was sort of stumped. But we talked it through, and I thought, okay, here's a kid who really is curious, where's chicken McNuggets come from? And it's sort of frightening that you have to talk it through and figure it out. So we talked about chickens and where they come from. We talked about wheat and where that comes from to bred the plant. And that was the definitive moment for me when I realized that what I love the most about food is the idea that from food, which we have to eat every day, come these narratives that connect us both to our environment and to our own personal health and bring us back to the table to eat with the people we care about the most. And I would never serve the person I love the most something I didn't think was good for them, and that's why I like to grow my own.